Hello, hello, and how is everybody? I do hope that you're doing well. I realised, I know it seems a bit obvious, but I realised before that some of you may not be in the best of health at the moment, or you may be in situations that you don't really enjoy, such as self-isolation or quarantine or something like that. So my hope is that having something else to think about, something else to do, something else to listen to that isn't where you are can just lighten that a little bit for you. So give you something else to think about. So, hi, I'm Jev. I read old-fashioned children's stories and I do that 3 days a week on Twitch, and I do that live on Twitch, and then 2 weeks later I put the videos over onto YouTube and gather them up into playlists for different books. And you can find me on both Twitch and on YouTube by looking for jevvnz or jevvm, M for Mary, type M. And don't forget that Jev has 3 V's in it. Yes, not 2, not 1, but 3 V's. Fairly distinct, although there are 1 or 2 others around. I'm not sure where they've come from. So anyway, that's me. That's who I am and what I do. I read children's stories, old-fashioned ones, because they come from a different era, a different world, a different time and place. And it's a great way to expand our, a great way to expand our worldview. Our point of view is to see others' world, others' viewpoint, things that mean a lot to other people, stuff like that. And so it's a really good way to, also it's good for a bit of escapism. It's like fantasy or sci-fi or something like that, but it just gives us something else to think about, somewhere else to think about, and a different set of problems to what we have now. And I mean, the world has enough problems as it is. We don't need to focus on them all the time. Sometimes it's good to have something else to think about. Anyway, so with that in mind, I shall carry on reading. We are currently reading Heidi by Johanna Spyri, and we are reading chapter 19, and it's called Heidi Teaches Obstinate Peter. So Heidi's been away. She's lived in the city in Frankfurt, I think it was, which is a very long way away for a little girl to have gone. She's come back home, and she and grandfather have been happy on the mountain, but they've moved down to the village, which is part way up the mountain, to live there during winter. And we'll see how we go. Heidi teaches obstinate Peter. Peter arrived punctually at school the following day. He had brought his dinner with him, for all the children who lived at a distance regularly seated themselves at midday on the tables, and resting their feet firmly on the benches, spread out their meal on their knees, and so ate their dinner, while those living in Dorfli went home for theirs. Till 1 o'clock they might all do as they liked, and then school began again. As soon as Peter finished his lessons, he went over to Uncle's to see Heidi. I'm just going to bring my seat a little closer to, and then I have to wiggle it sideways so it doesn't scoot backwards too much. A little bit closer to my desk. It just seemed a little bit too far away. Anyway, we shall carry on. When he walked into the large room at Uncle's today, Heidi immediately rushed forward and took hold of him and said, "I've thought of something, Peter." "What is it?" he asked. "You must learn to read," she informed him. "I have learnt," was the answer. Yes, but I mean so that you can really make use of it," continued Heidi eagerly. "I never shall," was the prompt reply. "Nobody believes that you cannot learn, nor I either now," said Heidi in a very decided tone of voice. "Grandmamma in Frankfurt said long ago that it is not true, and she told me not to believe you," because he had said that he couldn't learn. Peter looked rather taken aback at this piece of intelligence. "I will soon teach you to read, for I know how," continued Heidi. "You must learn it once, and then you can remember 1 or 2 hymns every day. Then you can read 1 or 2 hymns every day to grandmother." "Oh, I don't care about that," he grumbled in reply. This hard-hearted way of refusing to agree to what was right and kind, and to what Heidi had so much at heart, aroused her anger. With flashing eyes, she stood facing the boy and said threateningly, "If you won't learn as I want you to, I will tell you what will happen. You know your mother has often spoken of sending you to Frankfurt, that you may learn a lot of things, and I know where the boys there have to go to school." Clara pointed out the great house to me when we were driving together, and they don't only go when they are boys, but have more lessons still when they are grown men. I have seen them myself, and you mustn't think they have only one kind teacher like we have here. There are ever so many of them, all in the school at the same time, and they are all dressed in black, as if they were going to church, and have black hats on their heads as high as that, and Heidi held out her hand to show their height from the floor. So they're tall hats. Peter felt a cold shudder run down his back. "And you will have to go in amongst all those gentlemen," continued Heidi with increasing animation. "And when it comes to your turn, you won't be able to read and will make mistakes in your spelling. Then you'll see how they'll make fun of you, even worse than Tinette. And you ought to have seen what she was like when she was scornful." "Well, I'll learn then," said Peter, half sorrowfully and half angrily. Heidi was instantly mollified. "That's right. Then we'll begin at once," she said cheerfully. Among other presents, Clara had sent Heidi a book with which I will read that again. Among other presents, Clara had sent Heidi a book which the latter had decided would be just the thing for teaching Peter, as it was an ABC book with rhyming lines. So the two sat together at the table with their heads bent over the book and began the lesson. Peter was made to spell out the first sentence 2 or 3 times over, for Heidi wished him to get it correct and fluent. At last she said, "You don't seem to be able to get it right, but I will read it aloud to you once. When you know what it ought to be, you will find it easier." And she read out, "ABC must be learned today, or the judge will call you up to pay." "I shan't go," said Peter obstinately. "Go where?" asked Heidi. "Before the judge," he answered. "Well, then make haste and learn these 3 letters, and then you won't have to go." Peter went at his task again and repeated the 3 letters so many times, and with such determination, that she said at last, "You must know those 3 now." Seeing what an effect the first 2 lines of verse had had upon him, she thought she would prepare the ground a little for the following lessons. "Wait, and I will read you some of the next sentences," she continued. "Then you will see what else there is to expect." Then she began in a slow, clear voice. "D, E, F, G must run with ease, or something will follow that does not please. Should H, I, J, K be now forgot, disgrace is yours upon the spot. And then L, M must follow at once, or punished you'll be for a sorry dunce. If you knew what next awaited you, you'd haste to learn N, O, P, Q. Now R, S, T be quick about, or worse will follow, there's little doubt." Heidi paused, for Peter was so quiet that she looked to see what he was doing. These many secret threats and hints of dreadful punishments had so affected him that he sat as if petrified and stared at Heidi with horror-stricken eyes. Her kind heart was moved at once, and she said, wishing to reassure him, "You need not be afraid, Peter. Come here to me every evening, and if you learn as you have today, you will at least know all your letters, and the other things won't come, the threats. But you must come regularly, not only now and then as you do to school. Even if it snows, it won't hurt you." He promised, and the lessons being finished for this day, he now went home. Peter obeyed Heidi's instructions punctually, and every evening went diligently to work to learn the letters, taking the sentences thoroughly to heart. The grandfather was frequently in the room, smoking his pipe comfortably while the lesson was going on, and his face twitched occasionally, as if he was overtaken with a sudden fit of merriment. Peter was often invited to stay to supper after the great exertion he had gone through, which richly compensated him for the anguish of mind he had suffered with the sentence for the day. So the winter went by, and Peter really made progress with his letters, but he went through a terrible fight each day with the sentences. He got at last to U. Heidi read out, "And if you put the U for V, you'll go where you will not like to be." Peter growled, "Yes, I shan't go." But he was very diligent that day, as if under the impression that one would seize him suddenly by the collar and drag him where he would rather not go. The next evening Heidi read, "If you falter at W, worst of all, look at the stick against the wall." Peter looked at the wall and said scornfully, "There isn't one." "Yes, but do you know what grandfather has in his box?" asked Heidi. "A stick as thick almost as your arm, and if he took that out, you might as well say, 'Look at the stick on the wall.'" Peter knew that thick hazel stick, and immediately bent his head over the W and struggled to master it. Another day the lines ran, "Then comes the X for you to say, or be sure you'll get no food today." Peter looked towards the cupboard where the bread and cheese were kept and said crossly, "I never said that I should forget the X." "That's all right. If you don't forget it, we can go on to learn the next, and then you will only have one more," replied Heidi, anxious to encourage him. Peter did not quite understand, but when Heidi went on and read, "And should you make a stop at Y, they'll point at you and cry, 'Fie, fie!' All the gentlemen in Frankfurt, with tall black hats on their heads and scorn and mockery in their faces, rose up before his mind's eye, and he threw himself with energy on the Y, not letting it go till at last he knew it so thoroughly that he could see what it was like even when he shut his eyes. He arrived on the following day in a somewhat lofty frame of mind, for there was now only one letter to struggle over, and when Heidi began the lesson with reading aloud, "Make haste with Z, if you're too slow, off to the Hottentots you'll go," Peter remarked scornfully, "I dare say, when no one knows even where such people live." "I assure you, Peter," said Heidi, "grandfather knows all about them. Wait a second and I'll run and ask him, for he is only over the way with the pastor." And she rose and ran to the door to put her words into action, but Peter cried out in a voice of agony, "Stop!" for he already saw himself being carried off by Alm uncle and the pastor and sent straight away to the Hottentots. Since as yet he did not know his last letter, his cry of fear brought Heidi back. "What is the matter?" she asked in astonishment. "Nothing. Come back. I'm going to learn my letter," he said, stammering with fear. Heidi, however, herself wished to know where the Hottentots lived and persisted that she should ask her grandfather, but she gave in at last to Peter's despairing entreaties. She insisted on his doing something in return, and so not only had he to repeat his Z until it was so fixed in his memory that he could never forget it again, but she began teaching him to spell, and Peter really made a good start that evening. So it went on from day to day. The frost had gone and the snow was soft again, and moreover fresh snow continually fell, so that it was quite 3 weeks before Heidi could go to the grandmother again. So much the more eagerly did she pursue her teachings, so that Peter might compensate for her absence by reading hymns to the old woman. One evening he walked in home after leaving Heidi, and as he entered he said, "I can do it now." "Do what, Peter?" asked his mother. "Read," he answered. "Do you really mean it? Did you hear that, grandmother?" she called out. The grandmother had heard and was already wondering how such a thing could have come to pass. "I must read one of the hymns now. Heidi told me to," he went on to inform them. His mother hastily brought the book, and the grandmother lay in joyful expectation. For it was so long since she had heard the good words, Peter sat down to the table and began to read. His mother sat beside him, listening with surprise and exclaiming at the close of each verse, "Who would have thought it possible?" The grandmother did not speak, though she followed the words he read with strained attention. It happened on the day following this that there was a reading lesson in Peter's class. When it came to his turn, the teacher said, "We must pass over Peter as usual, or will you try once more? I will not say to read, but to stammer through a sentence." Peter took the book and read off 3 lines without the slightest hesitation. The teacher put down his book and stared at Peter as at some out-of-the-way and marvellous thing unseen before. At last he spoke. "Peter, some miracle has been performed upon you. Here have I been striving with unheard-of patience to teach you, and you have not hitherto been able to say your letters even. And now, just as I had made up my mind not to waste any more trouble upon you, you suddenly are able to read a whole sentence properly and distinctly. How has such a miracle come to pass in our days?" "It was Heidi," answered Peter. The teacher looked in astonishment towards Heidi, who was sitting innocently on her bench with no appearance of anything supernatural about her. He continued, "I have noticed a change in you altogether, Peter. Whereas formerly you often missed coming to school for a week or even weeks at a time, you have lately not stayed away a single day. Who has wrought this change for good in you?" "It was Uncle," answered Peter. With increasing surprise, the teacher looked from Peter to Heidi and back again at Peter. "We will try once more," he said cautiously, and Peter had again to show off his accomplishment by reading another 3 lines. There was no mistake about it. Peter could read. As soon as school was over, the teacher went over to the pastor to tell him this piece of news and to inform him of the happy result of Heidi's and the grandfather's combined efforts. Every evening Peter read one hymn aloud. So far he obeyed Heidi. Nothing would induce him to read a second, and indeed the grandmother never asked for it. His mother, Brigitte, could not get over her surprise at her son's attainment, and when the reader was in bed would often express her pleasure in it. Now he has learned to read, there is no knowing what may be made of him yet. On one of these occasions the grandmother answered, "Yes, it is good for him to have learnt something, but I shall indeed be thankful when spring is here again, and Heidi can come. They are not like the same hymns when Peter reads them. So many words seem missing, and I try to think what they ought to be, and then I lose the sense, and so the hymns do not come home to my heart, as when Heidi reads them." The truth was that Peter arranged to make his reading as little troublesome for himself as possible. When he came upon a word that he thought was too long or difficult in any other way, he left it out, for he decided that a word or two less in a verse, when there were so many of them, could make no difference to his grandmother. And so it came about that most of the principal words were missing in the hymns that Peter read aloud. He's clever. He may not be smart, but he is clever. And I'm going to have a drink because that's the end of that chapter. And the next chapter is a strange-looking procession, but we're not starting that till I've had a drink. So, do you have something to drink? This is my water bottle. Do you have something to drink and something to snack on and somewhere comfortable to sit or somewhere comfortable to lie down while you're listening? I do hope you have. If you haven't, you have a moment or two to go and get them while you can, while I'm having my drink of water and chatting to everybody else who's here. Off you go. You won't miss any story if you're quick. So, in case, this is me chatting between chapters because that's the only time I chat. In case you're wondering at the noise, it's rather warm here at the moment. It's 23 degrees Celsius, which is, it's not hot, but if you've been in winter and been coming through spring, 23 is reasonably warm. So we've got lots of windows open. So I have the sound of a lawnmower in the background. I don't know if you can hear it, but I can hear it. And I had people talking outside before, because normally the windows are shut and so you don't hear them. But at the moment they're open just to get some fresh air in the house. It's also why I haven't got any sleeves on. It's just too hot at the moment. So for those of you who live in countries that don't use Celsius, who use Fahrenheit, that's apparently about 74 degrees Fahrenheit, which, yes, it's not particularly hot. I know North America gets much, much hotter temperatures, but we're not in the middle of summer yet. And we also have ocean all around our country, which modifies the temperature, and you get used to what you live with. And so for me, 23 degrees in November is reasonably warm. Yes, we were all getting too hot and making sure that we were in the shade and we had the windows open, drinks of cool water. So, are you back? Those of you who ran off to get your water and your snacks and everything else like that. Yeah, Having your window open is a great idea. Unfortunately for us, we have a pond nearby and there are lots of mosquitoes. So we've got the windows shut, but all of the inside doors open so that we at least get some fresh air between the rooms, because there's not a lot of people, but it's quite a big house. And last night, my husband went round hitting all the mosquitoes so that we could actually get some sleep instead of lying there in the dark listening to them and trying to anticipate if they were going to land on us and bite. That's part of the worst, but not the worst of, sorry, I'm just trying to get my charge cable, of having mosquitoes in the house. So hopefully tonight we won't have so many in the start. Here's my charge cable. Plug it in. I've got the iPad upside down. I read on a first generation iPad mini and it's very old. You can't actually get updates for it anymore because it's so old, but it still works for downloading ebooks of Project Gutenberg. So we shall carry on. We are reading Heidi by Johanna Spyri, not Johanna, Spyri, which is how I used to say it when I was a kid. Mind you, I think everybody did. And we're reading chapter 20, A Strange-Looking Procession. So I shall continue. It was the month of May. The clear, warm sunshine lay upon the mountain, which had turned green again because of all the grass on the meadows. The last snows had disappeared, and the sun had already coaxed many of the flowers to show their bright heads above the grass. Heidi was at home again on the mountain, running backwards and forwards in her accustomed way, not knowing which spot was most delightful. From the shed at the back came the sound of sawing and chopping, and Heidi listened to it with pleasure, for it was the old familiar sound she had known from the beginning of her life up here. Suddenly she jumped up and ran round, for she must know what her grandfather was doing. In front of the shed door already stood a finished new chair, and a second was in course of construction under the grandfather's skilful hands. "Oh, I know what these are for," exclaimed Heidi in great glee. "We shall want them when they all come from Frankfurt. This one is for Grandmamma, and the one you are now making is for Clara. And then there will, I suppose, have to be another," continued Heidi with more hesitation in her voice. "Or do you think, Grandfather, that perhaps Miss Rottenmeier will not come with them?" I think Heidi's hoping that Miss Rottenmeier will not come with them. "Well, I cannot say just yet," replied her grandfather, "but it will be safer to make one so that we can offer her a seat if she does." Because up until now, in Heidi's house, they sit on stools. Grandfather had made a stool with long legs so that she could sit closer to the table, and he has a stool which has shorter legs, because it's just a shepherd's hut that they live in summer. While talking with the grandfather, there was heard from above a whistling and calling, which Heidi immediately recognised. She ran out and found herself surrounded by her four-footed friends. They were apparently as pleased as she was to be among the heights again, for they leapt about and bleated for joy. When Peter at last got up to her, he handed her a letter. "There," he exclaimed. "Did someone give you this while you were out with the goats?" she asked in her surprise. "No," was the answer. "Where did you get it from, then?" "I found it in the dinner bag." Which was true to a certain extent. The letter to Heidi had been given to him the evening before by the postman at Dorfli, and Peter had put it into his empty bag. That morning he had stuffed his bread and cheese on top of it, and had forgotten it when he had called for Elm Uncle's 2 goats. Only when he had finished his bread and cheese at midday, and was searching in the bag for any last crumbs, did he remember the letter which lay at the bottom. Ooh, he's a little bit naughty, is Peter. Heidi read the address carefully, then she ran back to the shed, holding out her letter to her grandfather in high glee. "From Frankfurt, from Clara. Would you like to hear it?" The grandfather, who was ready and pleased to do so, as was Peter, who had followed Heidi into the shed. "Dearest Heidi, everything is packed, and we shall now in 2 or 3 days, as soon as Papa himself is ready to leave. We shall start now in 2 or 3 days, as soon as Papa himself is ready to leave. He is not coming with us, as he has first to go to Paris. The doctor comes every day, and as soon as he is inside the door, he cries, 'Off now as quick as you can, off to the mountain.' He is most impatient about our going. You cannot think how much he enjoyed himself when he was with... Sorry, I have an itch. That's probably because I'm thinking about mosquitoes and the heat. Anyway, how much he enjoyed himself when he was with you. He has called nearly every day this winter, and each time he describes over again all he did with you and the grandfather, and talks of the mountains and the flowers and of the great silence up there, far above all towns and villages, and of the fresh, delicious air, and often adds, no one can help getting well up there. He himself is quite a different man since his visit, and looks happy again. Oh, how I am looking forward to seeing everything, and to being with you on the mountain, and to making the acquaintance of Peter and the goats. I shall have first to go through a 6 weeks' cure at Regatz. This the doctor has ordered, and then we shall move up to Dorfli, and every fine day I shall be carried up the mountain in my chair and spend the day with you. Regatz is what they refer to as a spa town, and people would go there when they were unwell for various reasons, and they would do a range of therapies, sometimes in the water, sometimes drinking the water. There are some conditions caused by deficiencies, and what I don't know if they actually understood it at the time, but some of the spa towns, like Bath in England and lots of other places like that, they have different minerals in the water to what people get in their normal water at home where they live. Just because of the spring that it's coming from, the ground brings up certain minerals in it. And if you live somewhere where there's not a lot of that and you have a deficiency of that causes you to have a certain sort of illness, then going somewhere that has a lot of that in the water can actually help with your health a lot. So it's not old wives' tales, but these days we have a much wider range of food available that comes from different places, and so therefore it has different vitamins and minerals in it, instead of having to get it from going to somewhere that has it in the water. So it wasn't uncommon to go to places. I've visited several of these old towns in Europe that have those sort of backgrounds to them. Some of them are very old, that people have travelled for hundreds of miles for hundreds of years to go to those places once a year to help their health, or twice a year even. And they'll stay there for a while and do a course of the waters. So I shall have to go through a 6 weeks cure at Regatz. This the doctor has ordered, and then we shall move up to Dorfli, and every fine day I shall be carried up the mountain in my chair and spend the day with you. Grandmamma is travelling with me and will remain with me. She also is delighted at the thought of paying you a visit. But just imagine, Miss Rottermeier refuses to come with us. Almost every day Grandmamma says to her, well, how about this Swiss journey, my worthy Rottermeier? Pray say if you really would like to come with us. But she always thanks Grandmamma very politely and says she has quite made up her mind. I think I know what has done it. Sebastian gave such a frightful description of the mountains, of how the rocks were so overhanging and dangerous that at any minute you might fall into a crevasse, and how it was such steep climbing that you feared at every step to go slipping to the bottom, and that goats alone could make their way up without fear of being killed. She shuddered when she heard him tell of all this, and since then she has not been so enthusiastic about Switzerland as she was before. Fear has also taken possession of Tinette, and she also refuses to come, so Grandmamma and I will be alone. Sebastian will go with us as far as Regatz, and then return here. That's right. He was meant to take her right up to either Dorfli or to the grandfather's hut, and he didn't. He found someone to do that. I'm going to see if Regatz is a real place. Please excuse me while I thump away on the keyboard. Just have to wait for my browser to hurry up. It kind of puts itself a little bit to sleep when I'm not specifically using it, and it takes a while for it to wake up again. Oh, it is a real place. One of its names is Bad ragazz. Bad being written as bad, B-A-D, meaning bath. It's a famous watering place in a Swiss village that is a Swiss village situated on the left bank of the Rhine, and by rail it's 22 kilometres north of Spyri or 98 kilometres southeast of Zurich. It is at 599 metres altitude at the entrance to the magnificent gorge of Tamina, about 5 kilometres up by carriage road were the extraordinarily placed baths of Pfaffers. That's what they were originally called, the actual baths. Since 1840, the hot mineral waters of Pfaffers were conducted in pipes to Regatz, which is a more pleasant position. Consequently, Regatz much increased in importance since that date. In the churchyard is the grave of the philosopher Friedrich Schelling. And there's actually a monastery above Regatz. So, and there's the ruins of a castle. The monastery and the baths were, after 1969, converted into museums and are open to the public. There you go. Let's see if I can see where it is. I wonder. Ooh, I'm getting all technical here. And then I might be able to zoom in on that map that I had showed you before. I need to be able to zoom out slightly. Come on. Come on. Waiting for it to load. Oh, okay. So, it's the big town that's more central in the valley that Mayenfeld is. So there you go. It's not that far away from the Regatz is, I think, the place that the train went from to go to Frankfurt, along the way to Frankfurt. Mayenfeld is the smaller town or village kind of area. That was the more local size for the area where Heidi was living. So I'll find you the map. I'll turn it on. There you go. And so, no, that way. Sorry. Heidi is over here. And I'll see if I can make it bigger for you. Ooh, not that one. I was moving the wrong thing. Map. I have to drag it around with my mouse. Right. There is the area where Heidi lives. And Mayenfeld is there, and Regatz is there, near where that yellow bend is, on that main road that goes through the valley where those two are, and then Heidi is up the mountains on that side of that valley, from what I can understand. That's where the village is, Dorfli, which is not actually a real village in real life. But that's the village that... No, what did I just move? Oh, okay, that. Sorry. Map. Find edges of map. No, map. I really need to just get on with reading, and then we won't have to worry about this. I'm trying to get this where you can see where she was. There's Frankfurt. And there's Zurich. Anyway. And I shall turn that map off again because it's distracting. And I really am going to just read now. Although there may be a picture a bit later on. So we shall carry on. Right. So Grandmamma and I will be alone. Sebastian will go with us as far as Regatz and then return here. I can hardly bear waiting till I see you again. Goodbye, dearest Heidi. Grandmamma sends you her best love and all good wishes. Your affectionate friend, Clara. She really did enjoy having Heidi staying with her, because she's an invalid, because she's ill, and not strong. She hasn't really had a chance to get to know other people very much. And on top of that, Heidi was very much herself, not what everybody expected her to be or thought that somebody of her age group should be or anything like that. And that made a big difference to how she related to Clara. We shall carry on. Now, as soon as the letter had been read, Peter rushed out, twirling his stick in the air in such a reckless fashion that the frightened goats fled down the mountain before him with higher and wider leaps than usual. He followed at full speed, his stick still raised in the air in a menacing manner, as if he was longing to vent his fury on some invisible foe. This foe was indeed the prospect of the arrival of the Frankfurt visitors, the thought of whom filled him with exasperation. I wonder why. Maybe he thinks they're going to take her away. Heidi was so full of joyful anticipation that she determined to seize the first possible moment next day to go down and tell grandmother who was coming. Tell the grandmother who the guests were that were coming, and also particularly who was not coming. The old lady was no longer confined to her bed. When she was back in her corner at her spinning wheel, but there was an expression on her face of mournful anxiety. Peter had come in the evening before, brimful of anger, and had told about the large party who were coming up from Frankfurt, and he did not know what other things might happen after that, and the old woman had not slept all night, pursued by the old thought of Heidi being taken from her. Heidi ran in, and taking her little stool, immediately sat down by grandmother and began eagerly pouring out all her news, growing more excited with her pleasure as she went on. But all of a sudden she stopped short and said anxiously, "What is the matter, grandmother? Aren't you a bit pleased with what I am telling you?" Yes, of course, child, since it gives you so much pleasure," she answered, trying to look more cheerful. "But I can see all the same that something troubles you. Is it because you think after all that Miss Rottenmeier may come?" asked Heidi, beginning to feel anxious herself. No, it is nothing, child," said the grandmother, wishing to reassure her. "Just give me your hand that I may feel sure you are there. No doubt it would be the best thing for you, although I feel I could scarcely survive it." And now we have a helicopter flying overhead. You may or may not hear it. Yes, that noise is going through the microphone because I can see the microphone flickering when I'm not talking. Anyway, carrying on. "Although I feel I can scarcely survive it. I do not want anything of the best if you could scarcely survive it," said Heidi in such a determined tone of voice that the grandmother's fears increased, as she felt sure the people from Frankfurt were coming to take Heidi back with them. Since now she was well again, they naturally wished to have her with them once more. But she was anxious to hide her trouble from Heidi, if possible, as the latter was so sympathetic that she might perhaps refuse to go away, and that would not be right. "Heidi," she said, "there is something that would comfort me and calm my thoughts. Read me the hymn beginning, 'All things will work for good.'" For good? Heidi found the place at once and read out in her clear young voice, "All things will work for good to those who trust in me. I come with healing on my wings to save and set thee free." Yes, that is just what I wanted to hear," said the grandmother, and the deep expression of trouble passed from her face. Heidi looked at her thoughtfully for a minute or two and then said, "Healing means that which cures everything and makes everybody well, doesn't it, grandmother?" "Yes, that is it," replied the old woman with a nod of assent, "and we may be sure everything will come to pass according to God's good purpose." When the evening came, Heidi returned home up the mountain. The stars came out overhead one by one, so bright and sparkling that each seemed to send a fresh ray of joy into her heart. Not only were the nights of this month of May so clear and bright, but the days as well. The sun rose every morning into the cloudless sky, as undimmed in its splendour as when it sank the evening before, and the grandfather would look out early and exclaim with astonishment, "This is indeed a wonderful year of sun. It will make all the shrubs and plants grow apace. You will have to see, General, that your army does not get out of hand from overfeeding." That's talking to Peter. And Peter would swing his stick with an air of assurance and an expression on his face as much as if to say, "I'll see to that." So May passed, everything growing greener and greener, and then came the month of June, with a hot sun and long, light days that brought the flowers out all over the mountain, so that every spot was bright with them and the air full of their sweet scents. This month, too, was drawing to its close when one day Heidi, having finished her household duties, ran out with the intention of paying first a visit to the fir trees and then going up higher to see if the bush of rock roses was yet in bloom, for its flowers were so lovely when standing open in the sun. But just as she was turning the corner of the hut, she gave such a loud cry that her grandfather came running out of the shed to see what had happened. "Grandfather, grandfather," she cried, beside herself with excitement. "Come here, look, look." The old man was by her side by this time and looked in the direction of her outstretched hand. A strange-looking procession was making its way up the mountain. In front were two men carrying a sedan chair. That's a chair that's between two poles and carried, in which sat a girl well wrapped up in shawls. Then followed a horse mounted by a stately-looking lady who was looking about her with great interest and talking to the guide who walked beside her. Then a reclining chair which was being pushed up by another man, it having evidently been thought safer to send the invalid to whom it belonged up the steep path in a sedan chair, rather than pushing her in the wheeled one. The procession wound up with a porter, with such a bundle of cloaks, shawls, and furs on his back that it rose well above his head. Here they come, shouted Heidi, jumping with joy, and sure enough it was the party from Frankfurt. The figures came nearer and nearer, and at last they had actually arrived. The men in front put down their burden, Heidi rushed forward, and the two children embraced each other with mutual delight. Grandmamma, having also reached the top, dismounted and gave Heidi an affectionate greeting before turning to the grandfather, who had meanwhile come up to welcome his guests. There was no constraint about the meeting, for they both knew each other perfectly well from hearsay and felt like old acquaintances. After the first words of greeting had been exchanged, Grandmamma broke out into lively expressions of admiration. "What a magnificent residence you have, Uncle. I could hardly have believed it was so beautiful." Hang on, my page just went a little bit. "A king might well envy you, and how well my little Heidi looks, like a wild rose," she continued, drawing the child towards her and stroking her fresh pink cheeks. "I don't know which way to look first. It is all so lovely. What do you say to it, Clara? What do you say?" Clara was gazing round entranced. She had never imagined, much less seen, anything so beautiful. She gave vent to her great delight in cries of joy. "Oh, Grandmamma," she said, "I should like to remain here forever." The grandfather had meanwhile drawn up the invalid chair and spread some of the wraps over it. He now went up to Clara. "Supposing we carry the little daughter now to her accustomed chair. I think she will be more comfortable. The travelling sedan is rather hard," he said, and without waiting for anyone to help him, he lifted the child in his strong arms and laid her gently down on her own couch. He then covered her over carefully and arranged her feet on the soft cushion, as if he had never done anything all his life but wait on cripples. The grandmamma looked on with great surprise. "My dear uncle," she exclaimed, "if I knew where you had learned to nurse, I would at once send all the nurses I know to the same place, that they might handle their patients in like manner. How do you come to know so much?" Uncle smiled. "I know more from experience than training," he answered, but as he spoke the smile died away, and a look of sadness passed over his face. The vision rose before him of a face of suffering that he had known long years before, the face of a man lying crippled on his couch of pain and unable to move a limb, The man had been his captain during the fierce fighting in Sicily. He had found him lying wounded and had carried him away, and after that the captain would suffer no one else near him, and Uncle had stayed and nursed him till his sufferings ended in death. It all came back to Uncle now, and it seemed natural to him to attend the sick Clara and to show her all those kindly attentions with which he had once been so familiar. "Oh, Heidi, if only I could walk about with you," said Clara longingly. "If I could but go and look at the fir trees and at everything I know so well from your description, although I have never been here before." Heidi, in response, put out all her strength, and after a slight effort, managed to wheel Clara's chair quite easily round the hut to the fir trees. There they paused. Clara had never seen such trees before, with their tall, straight stems and long, thick branches growing thicker and thicker till they touched the ground. Even the grandmamma, who had followed the children, was astonished at the sight of them. Heidi had now wheeled Clara toward the goat shed and had flung open the door so that Clara might have a full view of the inside. Clara lamented to her grandmother that they would have to leave early before the goats came home. "I should so like to have seen Peter and his whole flock." "Oh, the flowers!" exclaimed Clara. "Look at the bushes of red flowers and all the nodding bluebells. Oh, if I could but get out and pick some." Heidi ran off at once and picked her a large nosegay of them. That's a posy. That's a hand-size one. "But these are nothing, Clara," she said, laying the flowers on her lap. "If you could come up higher to where the goats are feeding, then you would indeed see something. Bushes on bushes of the red centaury, and ever so many more of the blue bell flowers, and then the bright yellow rock roses that gleam like pure gold, and all crowding together in the one spot. And then there are others with the large leaves that grandfather calls bright eyes, and the brown ones with little round heads that smell so delicious. Oh, it is beautiful up there, and if you sit down among them, you never want to get up again. Everything looks and smells so lovely." Heidi's eyes sparkled with the remembrance of what she was describing. She was longing herself to see it all again, and Clara caught her enthusiasm and looked back at her with equal longing in her soft blue eyes. Sorry. "Grandmamma, do you think I could get up there? Is it possible for me to go?" she asked eagerly. "If only I could walk, climb about everywhere with you, Heidi." "I am sure I could push you up. The chair goes so easily," said Heidi, and in proof of her words she sent the chair at such a pace round the corner that it nearly went flying down the mountain. Grandmamma, being at hand, however, stopped it in time. The grandfather, meanwhile, had not been idle. He had by this time put the table and extra chairs in front of the seat, so that they might all sit out here and eat the dinner that was preparing inside. So what do you think he's been preparing, the meal that's been preparing inside is? The milk and the cheese were soon ready, and then the company sat down in high spirits to their midday meal. Grandmamma was enchanted, as the doctor had been, with their dining room, whence one could see far along the valley and far over the mountains to the farthest stretch of blue sky. A light wind blew refreshingly over them as they sat at table, and the rustling of the fir trees made a festive accompaniment to the repast. I never enjoyed anything as much as this. It is really superb," cried Grandmamma 2 or 3 times over, and then so suddenly, in a tone of surprise, "Do I really see you taking a second piece of toasted cheese, Clara?" There, sure enough, was a second golden-coloured slice of cheese on Clara's plate. "Oh, it does taste so nice, Grandmamma, better than all the dishes we have at Regat's," replied Clara as she continued eating with appetite. "That's right, eat what you can," exclaimed Uncle. "It is the mountain air which makes up for the deficiencies of the kitchen." And so the meal went on. Sorry, it's probably related to me coughing. I've now got the cheese on the outside. So the meal went on. Grandmamma and Uncle got on very well together, and their conversation became more and more lively. They were so thoroughly agreed in their opinions of men and things, and the world in general, that they might have been taken for old cronies. The time passed merrily, and then Grandmamma looked towards the west and said, "We must soon get ready to go, Clara. The sun is a good way down. The men will be here directly with the horse and sedan." Clara's face fell, and she said beseechingly, "Oh, just another hour, Grandmamma, or 2 hours. We haven't seen inside the hut yet, or Heidi's bed, or any of the other things. If only the day was 10 hours long." "Well, that is not possible," said Grandmamma, but she herself was anxious to see inside the hut. So they all rose from the table, and Uncle wheeled Clara's chair to the door. But they came to a standstill, for the chair was much too broad to pass through the door. Uncle, however, soon settled the difficulty by lifting Clara in his strong arms and carrying her inside. Grandmamma went all round and examined the household arrangements, and was very much amused and pleased at their orderliness and the cosy appearance of everything. "And this is your bedroom up here, Heidi, is it not?" she asked, as without fear she mounted the ladder to the hayloft. "Oh, it does smell sweet. What a healthy place to sleep." She went up to the round window and looked out, and Grandfather followed up with Clara in his arms, Heidi springing up after them. Then they all stood and examined Heidi's wonderful hay bed, and Grandmamma looked thoughtfully at it and drew in from time to time fragrant draughts of the hay-perfumed air, while Clara was charmed beyond words with the sleeping apartment. "It is delightful for you up here, Heidi. You can look from your bed straight out into the sky, and then such a delicious smell all around you, and outside the fir trees waving and rustling. I have never seen such a pleasant, cheerful bedroom before." Uncle looked across at the Grandmamma. "I have been thinking," he said to her, "that if you were willing to agree to it, your little granddaughter might remain up here, and I am sure she would grow stronger. You have brought up all kinds of shawls and covers with you, and we could make up a soft bed out of them. And as to looking after the child, you need have no fear, for I will see to that." Clara and Heidi were as overjoyed at these words as if they were 2 birds let out of their cages, and Grandmamma's face beamed with satisfaction. "You are indeed kind, my dear uncle," she exclaimed. "I was just thinking myself that a stay up here might be the very thing she wanted. But then the trouble, the inconvenience to yourself. And you speak of nursing and looking after her as if it were a mere nothing. I thank you sincerely. I thank you from my whole heart, uncle." And she took his hand and gave it a long and grateful shake, which he returned with a pleased expression of countenance. Uncle immediately set to work to get things ready. He carried Clara back to her chair outside, Heidi following, not knowing how to jump high enough into the air to express her contentment. Then he gathered up a whole pile of shawls and furs and said, smiling, "It is a good thing that Grandmamma came up well provided for a winter's campaign. We shall be able to make a good use of these." The two had meanwhile ascended to the hayloft and began to prepare a bed. There were so many articles piled one over the other that when finished it looked like a regular little fortress. Grandmamma passed her hand carefully over it to make sure there were no bits of hay sticking out. "If there's a bit that can come through, it will," she said. The soft mattress, however, was so smooth and thick that nothing could penetrate it. Then they went down again well satisfied, and found the children laughing and talking together, and arranging all they were going to do from morning till evening, as long as Clara stayed. The next question was how long she was to remain, and first Grandmamma was asked, but she referred them to the grandfather, who gave it as his opinion that she ought to make a trial of the mountain air for at least a month. The children clapped their hands for joy, for they had not expected to be together for so long a time. The bearers and the horse and guide were now seen approaching. The former were sent back at once. That's the people with the chair. The bearers. Excuse me a minute. Itches and tickles. Right, carrying on. The former was sent back at once, and Grandmamma prepared to mount for her return journey. "It's not saying goodbye, Grandmamma," Clara called out, "for you will come up now and then and see how we are getting on, and we shall so look forward to your visits." Grandmamma mounted her sturdy animal, and Uncle took the bridle to lead her down the steep mountain path. She begged him not to come far with her, but he insisted on seeing her safely as far as Dorfli, for the way was precipitous and not without danger for the rider, he said. Grandmamma did not care to stay alone in Dorfli, and therefore decided to return to Regatz, and thence to make excursions up the mountain from time to time. She probably would have been happy to stay in Dorfli if she was there with Clara. Peter came down with his goats before Uncle had returned. As soon as the animals caught sight of Heidi, they all came flocking toward her, and she, as well as Clara on her couch, was soon surrounded by the goats, pushing and poking their heads one over the other while Heidi introduced each in turn by its name to her friend Clara. It was not long before the latter had made the long-wished-for acquaintance of Little Snowflake, the lively greenfinch, and the well-behaved goats belonging to Grandfather, as well as of the many others, including the Grand Turk. Peter meanwhile stood apart, looking on, and casting somewhat unfriendly glances towards Clara. When the two children called out, "Good evening, Peter," he made no answer, but swung his stick angrily, as if wanting to cut the air in two, and then ran off with his goats after him. The climax to all the beautiful things that Clara had already seen upon the mountain came at the close of the day. As she lay on the large soft bed in the hayloft, with Heidi near her, she looked out through the round open window right into the middle of the shining clusters of stars, and she exclaimed in delight, "Heidi, it's just as if we were in a high carriage and were going to drive straight into heaven." "Yes, and do you know why the stars are so happy and look down and nod to us like that?" asked Heidi. "No, why is it?" asked Clara in return. "Because they live up in heaven and know how well God arranges everything for us, so that we need have no more fear or trouble, and may be quite sure that all things will come right in the end. But then we must never forget to pray and to ask God to remember us when he is arranging things, so that we too may feel safe and have no anxiety about what is going to happen." The two children now sat up and said their prayers, and then Heidi put her head down on her little round arm and fell off to sleep at once. But Clara lay awake for some time, for she could not get over the wonder of this new experience of being in bed up here among the stars. She had indeed seldom seen a star, for she never went outside the house at night, and the curtains at home were always drawn before the stars came out. Each time she closed her eyes, she felt she must open them again to see if the two very large stars were still looking in and nodding to her, as Heidi said they did. There they were, always in the same place. At last her eyes closed of their own accord, and it was only in her dreams that she still saw the two large, friendly stars shining down upon her. And that's the end of that chapter. And we'll have one more today, but I need to have a drink of water, and you probably need to rush off and have a pee or something like that. Off you go, quick. So I did some traveling in Europe a couple of years ago. My husband and I were in a van, just a little work van that had been turned into a mini camper, but not fancy. But it just looked, from the outside, it just looked like a work van, which was really good because it meant that we could actually stop overnight in lots of places and just park there under the trees, out of the way, so we weren't bothering people and not causing problems, and people didn't mind. They could see that we were staying in it, but because we didn't look like we were a great big camper van that had lots and lots of stuff and that we were going to live there forever and leave rubbish and make a mess and all that sort of stuff, people didn't mind so much. Anyway, one of the places we drove through is a place that's in a movie called The Last Holiday with a lady called Queen Latifah in it. And it's a town called Poop, P-U-P. And it's another one of these spa towns or bath towns where people used to go. Well, they still do, but not as much as they used to. people would go there to see if they could get some restoration of their health. And they still have a lot of those bath places there. So when we went there, what was I going to say? When we arrived there, we didn't arrive from the direction that most people come from, because the bit that's in the movie is the old part of it. So you've got these old buildings on the streets, and the streets are cobbled, and they do little you can get a ride in a carriage that goes up and down the cobbled streets and go past all these really, really old buildings and stuff like that. And so one aspect of that, one part of that was that the city, the town, over the years has had more and more people moving there and living there, because that's what happens with cities. And one of the things that happened with it is that, I'm just looking on my map, I'm trying to see if this is actually it, but it's not. And if this is it, but it's not, I'm looking at markings on my map. It's over this way, probably a bit more. And so most people, when they go there now, if they're going to visit this place, they will come from the main roads, the really big main roads, coming from other countries. We weren't, because we were travelling up through lots of countries, past the Adriatic Sea, countries that are alongside the Adriatic Sea. So you've got Italy on one side, and then you've got the Adriatic Sea, and then you've got these other countries on the other side, which I'm waving my hands around on the right way for me, not for you. Sorry about that. And so we were driving up through these countries from Greece up towards Germany. And so one of the places we went past was that particular town. And it was not from the same direction that most people go there. We went there from the back of the old town. We came in over the hills, through the hills, down from the mountains, I suppose. And we just suddenly ended up in the town, in the middle of the old town. So it was really quite amazing to actually see this. I can't find it on the map. Oh, what a shame. No, that's not the place on the map. Anyway, if you look up that place in the movies, it says where it is. If you look up the movie Last Holiday with a lady called Queen Latifah, it will show you the particular place. And it will, you'll see, if you look at it on a map, because you'll see where the locations are that they actually filmed it. And they filmed part of it at this particular place. And if you look at it on a map, you can see that the whole of the modern part of the city is down here, and then you've got the old city up in the narrow valley between these higher hills and mountains. And it's quite amazing just being able to suddenly arrive in the middle of the old part of the city without driving all through these suburbs. You come down this windy back street, and you're suddenly right there next to this river with all the cobbled streets and these old buildings and all these things like this. And it's quite interesting. Very different to what you expect to see. And I'm going to stop trying to find it and tell you all about it. But it's worth having a look. Go on, have a look sometime. Anyway, I'm going to carry on with reading, because that was a bit long and windy. Sorry about that. But look it up. See if you can find it. I've clicked around too much on my browser for being in the middle of reading, so I will stop doing that now. Maybe I'll find it on a map and show you in our Discord server. That's an idea. Or you could find it and post it in the Discord server. Anyway, so I'm Jev and I'm reading Heidi by Johanna Spyri, and we are reading chapter 21, Happy Days for the Little Visitor. And this is the last chapter for today. Not the last chapter of the book, just the last chapter for today. There are 2 more chapters after this one. So let's not worry about that. We'll read them next time. Chapter 21, Happy Days for the Little Visitor. Next morning at sunrise, Alm Uncle went softly up the ladder to see if the children were awake yet. Clara had just opened her eyes and was looking with wonder at the bright sunlight that shone through the round window and danced and sparkled about her bed. She could not at first think where she was until she caught sight of Heidi sleeping beside her and heard the grandfather's cheery voice asking her if she had slept well. She assured him that when she had once fallen asleep, she had not opened her eyes again all night. The grandfather was satisfied at this and immediately began to help her with her dress with so much gentleness and understanding that it seemed as if his chief calling had been to look after sick children. When Heidi awoke, she was surprised to see Clara dressed and already in the grandfather's arms, ready to be carried down. She hurried up too and soon ran down the ladder and out of the hut, and there further astonishment awaited her. Grandfather had been busy the night before after they were in bed. Seeing that it was impossible to get Clara's chair through the hut door, he had taken down 2 of the boards at the side of the shed and had made an opening large enough to admit the chair. These he left loose so that they could be taken away and put up at pleasure. He was at this moment wheeling Clara out into the sun because he didn't want to leave the chair out overnight. That's what that was about. He left her in front of the hut while he went to look after the goats, and Heidi ran up to her friend. "Oh, Heidi, if only I could stay up here forever with you," exclaimed Clara happily, turning in her chair from side to side that she might drink in the air and sun from all quarters. "Now you see that it is just what I told you," replied Heidi, delighted, "that it is the most beautiful thing in the world to be up here with grandfather." The latter at that moment appeared, coming from the goat shed and bringing 2 small foaming bowls of snow-white milk, one for Clara and one for Heidi. "That will do the little daughter good," he said, nodding to Clara. "It is from little Swan, and it will make her strong. To your health, child. Drink it up." Clara had never tasted goat's milk before. She hesitated and smelt it before putting it to her lips, but seeing how Heidi drank hers up without hesitating and how much she seemed to like it, Clara did the same and drank till there was not a drop left, for she too found it delicious, tasting just as if sugar and cinnamon had been mixed with it. That's different to any goat's milk I've ever had, but let's never mind that. "Tomorrow we will drink too," said the grandfather, who had looked on with satisfaction at seeing her follow Heidi's example. So that's good. It's not too much at once. Don't just go from none to all of it. When Peter arrived with the goats, Uncle drew him aside and said, "From today, be sure you let little Swan go where she likes. She knows where to find the best food for herself, and so if she wants to climb higher, you follow her, and it will do the others no harm if they go too. A little more climbing won't hurt you, and in this matter she probably knows better than you what is good for her. I want her to give as fine milk as possible, so now be off and remember what I say, and don't look so cross about it." Peter doesn't like having to do any extra work, obviously. Peter was accustomed to give immediate obedience to Uncle, and he marched off with his goats, but with a turn of the head and roll of the eye that showed he had some thoughts in reserve. The goats carried Heidi along with them a little way, which was what Peter had wanted. "You will have to come with them," he called to her, "for I shall be obliged to follow little Swan." "I cannot," Heidi called back from the midst of her friends, "and I shall not be able to come for a long, long time, not as long as Clara is with me. Grandfather, however, has promised to go up the mountain with both of us some day." As Heidi ran back to Clara, Peter doubled his fists and made threatening gestures towards the invalid on her couch, and then climbed up some distance without pause till he was out of sight, for he was afraid Uncle might have seen him. Clara and Heidi had made so many plans for themselves that they hardly knew where to begin. Obviously, the girls didn't see Peter's gestures, otherwise I think we would have heard about that. Heidi suggested that they should first write to Grandmamma, to whom they had promised to send word every day, for Grandmamma had not felt sure whether it would in the long run, suit Clara's health to remain up the mountain. With daily news of her granddaughter, she could stay on without anxiety at regattes, and yet be ready to go to Clara at a moment's notice. "Must we go indoors to write?" asked Clara. "It is so much nicer out here." So Heidi ran in and brought out her school book and writing things and her own little stool. She put her reading book and copybook on Clara's knees to make a desk for her to write upon, and she herself took her seat on the stool by the bench. And then they both began writing to Grandmamma. But Clara paused after every sentence to look about her. It was too beautiful for much letter writing. The breeze had sunk a little, and now only gently fanned her face and whispered lightly through the fir trees. Now and again the call of some shepherd boy rang out through the air, and the echo answered softly from the rocks. Because Peter's not the only shepherd boy in the mountains, don't forget that. There are a lot. People kept goats, and so there are other shepherd boys taking their goats up to the pastures. Thus the morning passed. The children hardly knew how, and soon Grandfather came with the midday bowls of steaming milk. Then Heidi pushed Clara's chair under the fir trees, where they spent the afternoon in the shade, telling each other all that had happened since they last met. So the hours flew by, and all at once it seemed the evening had come with the returning Peter, who still scowled and looked angry. I'm just going to show you. They're round the corner under the fir tree. There you go. And I know I can't make it sharper for you, sorry. So you've got Clara in her wheelchair and Heidi sitting on the ground underneath. And they're under the tree to keep out of the sun so they don't get quite so hot in the middle of the afternoon sunlight. Sorry, my eyes are itchy now. "Good night, Peter," called out Heidi as she saw he had no intention of stopping to speak. "Good night, Peter," called out Clara in a friendly voice. Peter took no notice and went surlily on with his goats. As Clara saw the grandfather leading away little Swan to milk her, she was suddenly taken with a longing for another bowlful of the fragrant milk, and waited impatiently for it. "Isn't it curious, Heidi?" she said, astonished at herself. "As long as I can remember, I have only eaten because I was obliged to, and everything used to seem to taste of cod liver oil. And I was always wishing there was no need to eat or drink, and now I am longing for Grandfather to bring me the milk." "Yes, I know what that feels like," replied Heidi, who remembered the many days in Frankfurt when all her food used to seem to stick in her throat. When Grandfather at last brought the evening milk, Clara drank it up so quickly that she had emptied her bowl before Heidi, and then she asked for a little more. The grandfather went inside with both the children's bowls, and when he brought them out again full, he had something else to add to their supper. He had walked over that afternoon to a herdsman's house where the sweetly tasting butter was made, and had brought home a large pat, some of which he had now spread thickly on 2 good slices of bread. That night, when Clara lay down in her bed and prepared to watch the stars, her eyes would not keep open, and she fell asleep as soon as Heidi, and slept soundly all night, a thing she never remembered having done before. The following day and the day after passed in the same pleasant fashion, and the third day there came a surprise for the children. 2 stout porters came up the mountain, each carrying a bed on his shoulders, with bedding of all kinds, and 2 beautiful new white coverlids. That's the dog outside, not our dog, the neighbour's dog, barking at something going past. I'm not sure what. That's all right. coverlids. The men also had a letter with them from Grandmamma, in which she said that these were for Clara and Heidi, and that Heidi in future was always to sleep in a proper bed, and when she went down to Dorfli in the winter, she was to take one with her and leave the other at the hut, so that Clara might always know there was a bed ready for her when she paid a visit to the mountain. She went on to thank the children for their long letters and encouraged them to continue writing daily so that she might be able to picture all they were doing. Grandfather went up the ladder and threw back the hay from Heidi's bed onto the great heap, because that's the hayloft, remember? And soon the beds were put up close to one another so that the children might still be able to see out of the window, for he knew what pleasure they had in the light from the sun and stars. Meanwhile, Grandmamma, down in Regatz, was rejoicing at the excellent news of the invalid which had reached her daily from the mountain. Clara found the life more charming each day, and could not say enough of the kindness and care which the grandfather lavished upon her, nor of Heidi's lively and amusing companionship. Having such fresh assurances each day that all was going well with Clara, Grandmamma thought she might put off her visit to the children a little longer, for the steep ride up and down was somewhat of a fatigue to her. The grandfather seemed to feel an especial sympathy for his little invalid charge, for he tried to think of something fresh every day to help forward her recovery. He climbed up the mountain every afternoon, higher and higher each day, and came home in the evening with large bunches of leaves which scented the air with a mingled fragrance as of carnations and thyme. He hung them up in the goat shed for little Swan to eat, so that she might give extra fine milk. So obviously he knows that that's the sort of thing that little Swan eats by choice. Clara had now been on the mountain for 3 weeks. For some days past, the grandfather each morning after carrying her down had said, "Won't the little daughter try if she can stand for a minute or two?" And Clara had made the effort in order to please him, but had clung to him as soon as her feet touched the ground, exclaiming that it hurt her so. He let her try a little longer, however, each day. If you're not used to it, it would be uncomfortable. Your feet are not used to being pressed against the ground, the floor, whatever sort of floor you've got. It was many years since they had had such a splendid summer among the mountains. Day after day there was the same cloudless sky and brilliant sun. The flowers opened wide their fragrant blossoms, and everywhere the eye was greeted with a glow of colour. And when the evening came, the crimson light fell on the mountain peaks and on the great snowfield, till at last the sun sank in a sea of golden flame. Heidi never tired of telling Clara of the beauty of the spot on the higher slope of the mountain, where the bright golden rock roses grew in masses, and the blue flowers were in such numbers that the very grass seemed to have turned blue. An irrepressible longing came over her to see it all once more. She ran to her grandfather, who was in the shed, calling out almost before she was inside, "Grandfather, will you take us out with the goats tomorrow? Oh, it is so lovely up there now." Sorry, my nose is itchy. We're nearly there. "Very well," he answered, "but if I do, little Clara must do something to please me. She must try her best again this evening to stand on her feet." Heidi ran back with the good news to Clara, and the latter promised to try her very best as the grandfather wished, for she looked forward immensely to the next day's excursion. Heidi was so pleased and excited that she called out to Peter as soon as she caught sight of him that evening, "Peter, Peter, we're all coming out with you tomorrow and are going to stay up there the whole day." Peter, cross as a bear, grumbled some reply and lifted his stick to give Greenfinch a blow for no reason in particular. But Greenfinch saw the movement, and with a leap over Snowflake's back, she got out of the way, and the stick only hit the air. Clara and Heidi got into their 2 fine beds that night, full of delightful anticipation of the morrow. They were so full of their plans that they agreed to keep awake all night and talk over them, but their heads had no sooner touched their soft pillows than the conversation suddenly ceased, and Clara fell into a dream of an immense field which looked the colour of the sky, so thickly inlaid was it with blue, bell-shaped flowers. And Heidi heard the great bird of prey calling to her from the heights above, "Come, come, come." And that's the end of that chapter and our reading for today. I will give you a hint for tomorrow's reading. The first chapter that we will have, not tomorrow, next reading. The first chapter we have is called Wicked Peter and the Unlucky Chair. Ooh, do you remember what happens? I kind of do. It's been a long time though, but that's okay. We'll have more of that next time and we'll find out what happens. My goodness. So, I wonder what was actually wrong with Clara. I don't know. But obviously she wasn't able to walk, apparently. So what are we going to do? You can look up that place, that movie, The Last Holiday, and find out whereabouts in Austria? I don't know. It may not be Austria. It may be some country that borders on Austria that's not Switzerland. Whereabouts that hotel is. No, not hotel. She goes to the hotel. It's a famous hotel. A very famous hotel. But find out what the town is that it's in and see if you can figure out what I was talking about with the valleys, with the old town up in the tight little valley, and then where it gets wider and more open is where the rest of the newer town has been built. So have a look. See if you can find it on the map. And if you haven't yet, come and join us on our Discord server, and then you can write something about it or share a picture there. So I'll give you the link for that. It's there. I found the link. And if you're looking at this on YouTube, there's a link in my profile that says how to get to my Discord server. I may have to give you permission to be part of the group, but you can apply. It's easy. And Discord's free. You can use it for free. You don't have to do anything to be able to use it. And also, I read live on Twitch, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 3 o'clock New Zealand time onwards. And then 2 weeks after my reading is put over on YouTube, where it's just this picture that you see here with me in it, without all the other words and bits and pieces around the edge. And I put those videos into playlists. So each playlist is a book, well, almost all of them. One of them is all of the stories written by one person, and another one is 2 books in one playlist, but that doesn't matter. And so if you're really wanting to get some story listening, and it's not when I'm reading out loud, then you can go over to YouTube and catch up on some stories that you've missed because you haven't heard them when I was reading previously. Anyway, so I look forward to seeing you next time, and I hope you have a great couple of days between now and then.